Hello, welcome to MEMO Conversations. I'm video producer Osman Butt, your host. Today we're going to look at I Am Palestine, a film that has just come out about a young Palestinian woman, a young Palestinian girl, I should say, who's going through school and are dealing with issues around identity, belonging, and just trying to find where Palestine is on a map in a classroom full of people who are non-Palestinian. My guests today are Iman Zawahry. Iman Zawahry is the first hijabi American Muslim filmmaker in the nation. She has worked on numerous films that have played at over 150 venues worldwide. She's an Emmy Award winner, Princess Grace Award recipient, a Lincoln Center Artist Academy Fellow, and Sundance Momentum Fellow and Sundance Universal Fellow. She is also the co-creator of the first American Muslim film grant with Islamic Scholarship Fund, where she's currently serves as director of film programs. Iman works to amplify the underrepresented female voice and frequently consulted speaks across the nation on Muslims in film. Her debut film, Americanish, has won 26 awards, including Best Director and Best Film, and has been acquired by Sony Pictures. Iman, welcome to MEMO Conversation.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
And this is obviously a joint interview because I'm also joined by Rifk Ebeid. She is a Palestinian-American Muslim writer, attorney, and pediatric speech language pathologist. I hope I'm saying all of this right. She is the author of 2 children's picture books about Palestine, including You Are the Color and Baba. What does my name mean? A Journey to Palestine. That was actually all one title. I read it as if it was separate things there, of which her debut children animation, I Am from Palestine, which is obviously what we're talking about today, is based off. She has a GD from George Mason University, an MA in Human Rights Studies from Columbia University, and an MA in Speech Language Pathology from the University of North Colorado, and a BA in Political Science and Near Eastern Languages and Cultures from the University of Florida. Rifk, welcome to MEMO Conversations as well.
Thank you for having me.
Well, to our audience, that was a very long introduction, but we're having a good conversation today. So we're going to start off with this film that you two have made, I Am Palestine. It's a 5-minute feature from what you've shown me. And could you perhaps, tell us about the story? What is it the story about? And why did you both feel this was important to tell? Either one want to take that?
Okay, you want me to? Okay. So the story is based off of this book of mine called Baba, What Does My Name Mean? And this is the main character. Her name is Saamidah. So we kind of follow her on her first day of school, and she's the only Palestinian in her school. And they are faced with this question of, where is everybody from? The teacher wants to get to know all the students and kind of see their background. And so she has to go look at the map, and she knows that she's Palestinian, but when she goes to the map, she doesn't see her country on there. And so the film kind of takes you through that process that happens when you're a child and you first discover that somebody else doesn't recognize that you exist.
And what was really awesome about it, so what happened was Rifk created this book, and the illustrator she's also an animator, and she had encouraged Rifk to do an animation. And Rifk reached out to me, and I was like, oh my gosh, we should totally do this. It'd be so awesome. I mean, I'm a director of live action. I've never done animation before, but I was like, let's make this happen. And so me being a non-Palestinian, I never realized the struggle that Palestinian Americans face when they go to school, which is so heartbreaking. And Rifk was getting all these, reading all these comments and stuff, and we're like, this is going to resonate to so many who have unfortunately gone through this process, but will give identity to those children in schools now for them to be proud of their identity and who they are.
And I'll tell you, like, from my perspective, what what I really appreciated in collaborating with Iman, I mean, me and Iman, just for some background, we grew up with each other, but in collaborating together on this, it was oftentimes really hard for me as a Palestinian to put into words or into like visual depiction of that emotion that we go through when we have those experiences in school. And so I guess I had never really delved into that. And so talking it out with each other, we were really able to flesh out this really powerful story that I think really did show all the feelings that she went through in trying to figure out like what's the confusion, the anxiety, the sadness, like all of that. And then how to overcome that as well.
So what were the, making this film, if you could talk to us a little bit about the process of making it, what were some of the challenges you came across and what did you really like learn from all of it?
Well, it was a first for both of us. And, particularly for me, I mean, Rifk was learning filmmaking basically, because this was for her first thing. And I mean, it's such a fantastic, because, when you work with people that don't know things, they're just like, get frustrated and stuff. Rifk never got frustrated. She was just learning the entire time. Me, myself, I'm like, wow, how am I going to go from like frame by frame on pictures into action and like continuity? And so working how to communicate with an animator was very interesting as well. I mean, this film took us, 2 years?
Yeah.
It took us 2 years to make. And, I give so much hats off to Lama, our illustrator, because she did it all by herself. When you look at animations, you see like names and it's just Lama. And she did have one friend kind of help her, but she really did the whole thing by herself. And I am a very meticulous director, so I gave her multitude of notes constantly and like working it out. So how I broke it down in terms of like, I did storyboards with my daughter. I looked at it with a story consultant at Rifk. I gave it back to Lema. Lema would draw me images and then see if it worked well together. And she'd give us little things that we could edit together. And so the process was just like, I loved how detail oriented it was, but also how we were able to communicate back and forth. The biggest challenge, of course, is like we're all learning, but that we're all far apart. So we're all in different areas. And, I also have like 3 other jobs. And so I'm trying to like figure out the schedule with everything to make sure it fits in. And again, Rifk was super patient with me and Lama, who were like, had other things going on to kind of make this film come to life.
Yeah. And for me, the entire thing was a challenge. I mean, honestly, this film exists because of Lema and because of Iman. I was already burnt out from my book and they really pushed for it. And just learning every step of the way, how filmmaking, like Iman said, I was learning how filmmaking works. And I would keep asking her, like, I can't believe this is what you do. It's so challenging. And if you know the process, you can really appreciate the outcome, because really like every shot, every movement, every angle, all of that has to be planned out, in addition to just writing the story to begin with and figuring out the dialogue and what characters you want to include and what's your overall message, like all of it, so many moving parts. And then,
Yes.
sorry, after you finally get all of that done and you're done with the animation, you're like, oh, good, we're ready to go. But then you discover you have music, you have sound, you have editing, you have all these things that I didn't know about before. So yeah.
Yeah, it's always an area, isn't it? Because people just assume these things happen, but like especially when it comes to making video, animation is one of the longest things you can do. I mean, 2 years and the animation would be considered very fast. It would be like
Well,
overnight.
It's only 5 minutes though, right?
Even for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
That's true. It's only 5 minutes, but even for 5 minutes, it's still a pretty good turnaround. I mean, people get stuck for years doing 5-minute animations.
And I also want to add, like, also what we really wanted to be really meticulous about was finding Palestinian creatives to work on this project with, because we really wanted it to be an authentic story that's being told that represents all of our experiences, and what we bring to the creative process. So you'll find that the cast and crew is majority Palestinian.
Were they Palestinian in outside of Palestine or within Palestine itself?
It's a mix.
Okay.
Mix, yeah.
How was it to sort of coordinate something like that? Because as you mentioned, you're in different places, but when you're in really big different places like West Bank and New York or wherever else, it's logistically very different. I mean, different internet speeds for a start. I mean,
yeah. Oh, it's a mix. Like some of them were born there and lived there, and then they came to the US. So we would get them when they were in the US at the same time.
Wasn't there a composer in Palestine? Wasn't Akram in Palestine for a bit, and then he came?
Yeah, at one point, one of the composers was there, and so that also adds to, like, again, with coordinating the timing and everyone else's jobs that they're working on, because this was a passion project. So people really worked on this with us out of the goodness of their heart. They were not getting paid what they deserved. And so this was really a passion project because we really believe in the message that was being told and the impact that it's going to have, especially what I hope for students, and particularly in the schools.
And that's why we're super excited. Like, our original Rifk's original idea was to just, you know, put it on YouTube so any kid can watch it and like feel great about it. And of course, I come from a very much independent filmmaking festival run life, and so I had encouraged her, like, let's try to do it that way. And she's like, I don't think so. And then she heard she got encouragement from a festival director, and so the first thing that we got into was River Run. And that premiered yesterday, right, Rifk? It premiered yesterday. And so it's online now. You can get tickets to watch it. But it's really great because River Run has a program called Film with Class. And that this animation is going to be showed to K through 12 classes in North Carolina, which is like phenomenal. Like, if that's all we got in this goal, I'm like so happy, because that's literally what we need, is to be in these American schools so kids know about these Palestinian children and their identity.
And the fact that they recognized that this story was important to bring to light. There's so many themes touched on it. And I even when I watch it, I've watched it a million times, but each time I watch it, I find something new. It's not just identity. Like, teachers can talk about the idea of maps. Who's drawing the maps? How did maps change throughout history? Names, pronunciation of names, and having students with, let's say, more challenging names still be confident in pronouncing their names correctly, and making sure that others at least try. There's so many different themes that can be touched on.
It's interesting because you mentioned, obviously, this is going across schools in the US or South Carolina. But when we sort of, from over here, when we look at news that is happening in the US, where you have a number of US states passing or trying to push what they regard as regarded as BDS type stuff, which could be anything from anything that makes Palestinians look normal and human. I'm sort of wondering, how is you're getting this stuff into schools in the midst of this kind of debate that's happening?
Well, I would tell you, we both live in Florida. So this is the state that is constantly doing those things. And it's so funny because so many people tell me, you need to get out of Florida. And we're like, no, this is where we need to be, right? This is where the fight needs to happen, because you don't see it, but there's a majority of us that are, you know, fighting the good fight, and, you know, the victims of the situations that are happening here constantly, which is exhausting. But it's in North Carolina, which, you know, I hope, and then I think we're working on it too, Rifk, is like to have it in the schools in Florida as well. Well, you know, it's a challenge again because they're pulling everything off themselves in Florida, but to have it be in North Carolina validates the need for it, and that it's wanted. And so if one state can do it, you know, then the rest of the states can follow suit, and we have the proof of it. Like, hey, look, North Carolina's doing this. We'd like to put in all the other schools, and once that happens, it'll come through. And usually, I know, again, we're in Florida, but the northern states And the Western states like California are very, very open to identity in this manner.
And it's also going to be showing after the River Run Film Festival. It's going to be showing at the Chicago Palestine Film Festival. And I was really, it relates to what you were asking, because they are also showing a feature film called Boycott, which is about this topic. And I just think from my perspective, it was not like an issue in my head, because again, like as a Palestinian, it's like, okay, what next? You know, what else? I'm not surprised by it. I'm not afraid of it. I don't think they can silence us. They can't scare us. They can't bully us into submission or into being silent. So I didn't even think about it. Like, it's not something that I think of as a challenge.
And another thing that also Rifk had taught me, and as I learned the process as well, is just as Muslims in general, and even as Arabs, the Palestinian plight we feel is all part of our own, but we'll never feel it because we're not fully actually Palestinian. Is that we don't have to frame the Palestinian identity inside of something else, and I think that's what's really important. It's like every time we frame Palestine, it has to be framed within the other. And that's not how it should be. It's just like, this is the Palestinian identity. This is our lives, and this is how we want to live. And I think that's really important when we're discussing, this story and the Palestinian plight.
Yeah, and that's an amazing point, because in our story as well, we made sure that it was really you immersed in Saamidah's experience. So we don't center anything else. Like, it is about her and her experience as a Palestinian-American student. And so you really walk through her emotions with her, and you see her as she is, not her in relation to somebody else or something else.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because as you were saying that, I was thinking, yeah, it's an interesting point, because one of the things I've definitely, you all noticed and I've noticed, is that if you can literally watch, let's say, an entire television program, a film, anything about Israel or on Israel, where you can watch the entire thing and nothing about Palestine is mentioned once. And it can be the most, innocuous, everyday, artsy film, and something's happening in Tel Aviv. Never will, Palestinians be mentioned, but you cannot do the same when it comes to Palestinian Palestinian art or film or whatever, or just everyday life, because that's the power dynamic that exists on the ground. Nothing a Palestinian can do, especially in the West Bank and other places, can be done without Israel in some way being involved. So, and that's sort of reflected in the art. There is this sort of danger in a way when it comes to art and representation, that even within the Palestinian art, that only Palestinians exist because the Israelis are there, whereas the Israelis can create an artistic world where Palestinians don't exist. So this is an interesting sort of artistic challenge for the arts community, I feel.
And that's a great point. And like, they can create that because they are literally trying to do that. Like, they are literally trying to live in a world where we don't exist, and they're taking tangible actions to make that happen. And yes, like you said, most of our stories, it has to reference them, because that is the power that is trying to destroy us. And so I oftentimes say, like, we can't talk about Palestinian joy without recognizing what we have to go through just to experience, even to be able to experience that joy. Like, there has to be that other aspect. But I think what we're trying to do now, and especially in my stories, is I'm trying to just recenter it to us and our feelings and our narrative, and not allow them to shape the narrative or control the narrative.
As a man have thoughts now, or do want to move on?
No, yeah, it should. Yes, she's just reiterating what we were saying before. It's like and that's like, I just don't feel like it ever should be mentioned. It's like there doesn't have to be one after the other. This is about the Palestinian story, period. So yes.
Yes. So which brings me to my next question, which I'm going to divide it up a little bit, because obviously, man, you're not Palestinian, but I do want your answers on this. And my question was related to sort of younger generations of Palestinians growing up in the US specifically. But to Iman, I'd like to also ask that of Egyptians and Arabs in general, from what you can tell. How, we now obviously got, I believe they're called Gen Z. I don't like these generational markers that we use, but it's what's being used. So when it comes to, them growing up in the United States, what issues are they facing right now, in terms of how they relate to Palestinian, Arab, or Egyptian identities? And how does Palestinian culture and identity, in the case of Palestinians, but obviously in the case of Egyptians, Egyptian identity, how are they relating to these things? What interests them about it?
If I can answer, I can actually, even though I am not Palestinian, I feel like I can speak on the Palestinian thing because I actually teach at the university. This is where I am right now. So I'm around Gen Zs constantly. And so I teach a class called Islam, Media, and Pop Culture, where we deal with how Muslims are in different parts of media and pop culture. And one thing that I've incredibly known, of course, Palestine comes up. And what I've noticed about this generation, the Gen Zers, before the other generations, the millennials and the Xers, like if you talked about Palestinians at all, it was like they were in the wrong constantly. And it was like the Twilight Zone, where it's like we're constantly fighting for the voice of the Palestinians. And now it is actually the opposite. All these Gen Zers are like about the Palestinian plight and see what has happening overseas and sees their journey. And I'm a huge fan of the Gen Zers. I tell you what, I've learned so much from them. And I have to deal with generations because I see them coming through, but like, they are all about, who you are, stand up for who you are. You don't have to educate people. It's not your job. Like people need to and of course the BLM movement is a huge part of this too, in the past few years, as well as, seeing what the oppression has done. And so I think it's pretty amazing. I mean, no one really cares about Egyptians, they're not, not a thing, but it's always like, to me, it's like the Muslim discrimination, but yeah, Rifk, you can go ahead.
I'm not like in constant connection with Gen Zers. I work with like a much younger population, but I know like from my own days as a student activist, I can definitely see how the climate has shifted immensely. Like Iman said, it was either silenced or just very taboo to talk about Palestine, even amongst groups who would be perceived as allies. It was really, really challenging. I oftentimes felt like the only person on campus that was willing to talk about it in a way that, again, centers the Palestinian narrative and is not just in constant defense of what the Israeli narrative is, or defending against that. It was really, really hard growing up doing that. And I see now that with social media and just more awareness of social justice and what is justice and how to pursue it, the kids nowadays have such a better chance, better experience. I think it's still hard. I'm not saying it's not hard on them. They still face silencing. A lot of people with social media comes the smear campaigns and all of that. But I just think there's more solidarity building from the years and decades of work that people before us have done. And so the momentum, like we've gained so much momentum. So I only see it as up from here. Like we're doing good. And they will, they're so energetic and like passionate, the younger kids. And so I'm really proud of them when I watch what they're doing. And I can see how they're gonna change the narrative even further.
Yeah, it's interesting because, thinking about US campus culture when it comes to, Palestinians and dealing with Palestinian issues, I'm also sort of reminded that you do have websites like, was it Campus Watch and stuff where they sort of profile people. And there was always a running joke that Campus Watch was like the activist Tinder because it was sort of giving you profiles of people, that information you wish you knew.
Yeah, and those websites still exist, and they are still attacking people, especially like working, like educators, Palestinian educators are getting attacked. Like I said, the smear campaigns are still there, but they're like holding on for dear life, those websites and those groups. You can tell they're struggling, and they're just trying to find anything. They're still trying to hurt people, but again, like, if you come from a group of people like us Palestinians, if you come from trauma and in your history and overcoming it, it's just part of what it is to be Palestinian. So like, it's expected, and you just deal with it.
And so because now you've got an increasing access in the West, and obviously in the US, to Palestinian literature and film and art, there's, you know, increasing access through to these things. What do you think the impact of Palestinian culture has had on in the West, and what what do you feel still needs to be done here?
I mean, I will say it was like The Present, the Netflix short that was just Oscar nominated last year, was such a huge deal for our community in general, is that, that was recognized and shown, and it was such a powerful short film. I don't know if you've seen it, but that's like a prime example of like having the voice heard, and the importance of seeing it, because, again, showing that in classes, and like understanding, like, of course, this is what we do. I believe media is the best and most effective way to educate, and because you are put in the human experience of someone. So this guy was just trying to get his daughter a present, and the struggles of going through it, and how difficult it was. Again, it wasn't framed in the other, it was framed in their life. And your question about like what's the importance of doing it is like, we need to have a multitude of those stories, right? We have this present happening. We had, Amrika, that started off at Sundance 10-15 years ago, which was one of the first American Palestinian films that showed going through a checkpoint, and then, having a children's animation, it's like one of the first of its kind of a Palestinian-American story. And, it's just us on a shoestring budget trying to pull it together, and like, but it's still, the story's super impactful. So it's about abundance. It's like the importance of having abundance of multitude of different stories for us all to relate to, and to see the journey of everybody kind of coming through.
Yeah, and I see the impact like in the education that's happening. Like, people are being educated from an indigenous perspective, from an authentic lens. Before, like when I was growing up, we only had access to the news and what we were shown on the news, and that's what most Americans had access to. And so you were only shown one narrative, and the news is still sticking with that. Like they're holding on tight to that one narrative. But now we have so much access to other things. Like you said, we have books, film, plays, everything. Is people are starting to delve into all these different mediums. And like Iman said, the more we need more, because the more we put out, the more people will be educated. Different people are into films, different people are into books. It's just spreading it into all these genres to educate.
And moreover, it is us that are telling our own stories, and that's what's incredibly important. And so we have to, of course, I run this film grant for Muslims, so like that's my big thing, is like we have to support the people that are telling the stories in every aspect, from like funding all the way up to distribution and journalism and everything else. And that's kind of how we are able to uplift and create like better education and like unity within our communities.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and it's also, because I mean, I'm just thinking about this as well, because as we've been saying, Palestinians, especially younger generations, are having a much, still having a hard time, but having an easier time to identify. And there is an increasing receptiveness towards, what's happening to Palestinians and the information and stories around that in the United States and elsewhere. And it is kind of remarkable to think about how that's come about, because you think about it, you look at what the Israelis have done. They've got effectively state backing for most of their efforts. So you've got what people call Hasbara, which is like explanation, but actually means like propaganda, where it can involve all sorts of things, but it involves the Israeli government funding arts and films to sort of get the Israeli perspectives out there. So there's an entire state machinery behind it.
Mhm.
With the Palestinians, it's really interesting because it feels like this has happened in a sense more organically, and in a way, despite, possibly in spite of Palestinian leadership.
And that's a great point. I just think it tells to how we are the indigenous people. Like, we don't need it to happen in any other way than organically, because we are the original people there. Like, it just, the way that it's happening on a grassroots level, it's just so indicative of like the bigger picture.
Yeah, and what's really great too about like just the Palestinian-American diaspora is that, so like, mashallah, some of them are so financially successful, right? And so they have the ability to support this art voice. And I mean, this is again, fight with like just having brown people in general support the arts, but they're seeing it more and more from these grassroots things like our little animation and like that short, that the impact. And so more and more are going to be able to support and see the impact of having it, and that we have the ability to make this. We don't need a government to support us. We have our own backing. So
Yeah. And I think even if they're scared of it at first, like the older generation, they're like, do you really need a cartoon? That once they actually see it and they see the impact that it has, they're so proud. And I think it's like this thing where they don't realize it because they never had that. So they don't realize how much it's needed. Like a lot of, when I did my books, I never had these books growing up. I had older, like, encyclopedia of the Palestine problem. That's what I was reading when I was younger. I didn't have like a children's book. And so now when I read it to my kids, I can witness in real time what it's like for them to see themselves in a book. And it hits me that I didn't have that as a child, and how much it would have been helpful to have that, you know? And so like you said, people are more receptive, but also our children are more equipped. And so now my kids know, they already know before they have any experience in school, they're already equipped to handle it. And my 6-year-old has already had that experience with her teacher, where they mentioned Israel, and she told her, we don't call it that, we say Palestine, that I'm Palestinian and that's where I'm from. And she's 6. And you know, I wish I had that as a kid, to have that that gumption or whatever it's called, to be able to say.
And that's really amazing, is again, when we don't have it, we create it. And so Rifk didn't have it in herself, so she created it for her kids and all these kids to have that. And that's so, I got chills. That's such a great experience that she had. I didn't know that.
You know, she came home and I was shocked. I myself, and I'm the one like telling her all this stuff, but I was, oh, you did that. You stood up for yourself. That's great. Yeah. I mean, I've been talking about it since preschool, but I just feel like she was equipped to handle any challenges she would have faced from saying that.
But also because of you, the pride of it, right? Like, in the seeing that of everything around it, that there is a book, there is an animation, like, look how cool this is, teacher. Like, this is my identity. It's not just kind of like, she's not scared of what the other kids are going to say, like, which we were, you know, back in the day. So, or even, well, actually the teacher, because the teachers are the ones that bully the most. So yeah. It's
also interesting, she might have been the youngest person on campus watches websites, so the kindergarten version.
Yeah. making the jokes. Okay.
Sorry, I had to spoil this beautiful moment with that, but it was coming out of me and I couldn't stop it.
All right.
That's funny.
Yeah, so I just wanted to quickly come back on something you said, Iman, before we go to the last question, which is, you mentioned obviously there is now Palestinians in the diaspora who are doing financially well, who see the need to fund art and culture to tell these stories. I wonder if you could sort of expand a little bit on that, and is there an equivalent to that in, say, for other people, you know, other groups like Egyptians or other Arabs? Because my impression is, in general, there isn't much funding even from the private sector individuals for funding of arts and culture and films, from non-Palestinians about, stuff to do with Egyptians and stuff?
Well, I mean, so my jam is the American Muslim story, and that's what kind of I've worked to fund for the past 10 years, and we're in the 10th year for it. And so in general, no matter what, being like one of the Arabs, one of the South Asian communities, to me, those are all like kind of Muslim stories. And so the Muslim stories come together. So we are supporting the Muslim stories when everyone is telling what their identity and their culture is. I feel like religiously it's a whole separate thing, because it's like, how we've been attacked in that way. But in terms of cultural, like Arabs, because Arabs are not just, they're obviously Muslim and Christians, and we're really proud that half of our cast are actually Palestinian Christians and crew, is that I feel the cultural Arabs do have lots more support than like the religious stuff on the side, but they're slowly kind of seeing how it's pulling through. And it's unfortunate that we had to show them what it does, but that's normal, right? That's normal with what people say is like, okay, look at this great film that did this change, right? Like my film, Americanish, is the first American Muslim rom-com made by Muslim women, and it was acquired by Sony. And so like I've showed like, okay, this is a proof, and this is a need, and this is a change that it's making. Same thing with The Present in America, even though America was made, it showed the Palestinian plight, but then and that was during the time, it was in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, where it was like, you cannot speak about this. And it was still supported by one of the biggest organizations, Sundance, and in the world. So it's just that we have to show the importance at a young age to support the arts, and we have to convince the elders of that importance. And I've actually seen it come through, and I really didn't think it would actually happen, but it's amazing. Like now all these aunties and uncles that come to our banquets to give money, or that, fund our films, they're there and they're like, yes. And I'm like, what? It's like weird for me, because I'm so used to the no, 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 no. But again, it just goes back to the same thing as like, how do you do that? Is just, you have to show them that it works. And also for business people, you have to show them that it makes money. So, which it does to both. If you look like, at, MEMO and all those other shows, like they make that money.
And I want to add, like, the way you have to show them how it works is, so in their mind, they think that how it works means it has to end up in the movie theater, or it has to be something big. And so what I learned, and what I hope we can show people, is that you can make a huge impact even if you're not in a theater. Like you can make a community-wide impact, and then that will set the foundation for new filmmakers to come about, and slowly, eventually, we get to that point where we're all over TV and all over the theaters and all of that. But it has to start somewhere, and we have to recognize that these baby steps are just as important, and these baby wins are just as important as the huge wins.
So to my sort of last question then, and you can sort of take this any way you want. So when it comes to watching, Palestinian films or any kind of art, what do you think, what has caught your eye, either that's going to come out or has already come out or has been out for a while, that you feel people should pay attention to, should watch, and why? This is open for both of you.
I mean, to me, I've already said them, but yeah, I've said them.
That's hard for me. I want to say all of our things that we produce are important for us to watch, because we're not a monolith. And so it's good to see everyone's work, so that you can get a more comprehensive understanding of what it is to be Palestinian and what are Palestinian stories. A recent movie that I watched that I just really loved was Farha, and it was about the Nakba. And that's what my second children's book is about, the Nakba as well. Not a lot of people take on that topic, and I think Farha did it so beautifully. And I was so grateful for the film, and it was like I just breathed a sigh of relief that it was so authentic, and I really felt like it's a huge contribution to our story. So that's like something more recent that I've seen. And then obviously I hope everybody gets a chance to watch our cartoon. And yeah, just all of our stories.
Oh, and I mean, just for me, it's funny because I'm actually looking up, like, if I just did a Google search on Palestinian films, it's always they're actually like Israeli films that and bring in Palestinian story, or like, you know, a love affair between the two of them, you know, things like that. Even Paradise Now, which was it was made in 2005. It was such a big, it was the first time I guess you saw that story, and I loved it so much. But thinking about it back now, it's still framed within a terrorist frame, and that is like, no, we're not doing that. You know, like that's
Like it's catering, it caters, a lot of the messaging caters to the Western gaze and like what they thought non-Arabs would want to see. And like you said, at the time we were like, wow, this movie is great. It's awesome, because we were so desperate to see ourselves represented, you know, and from like a Palestinian voice. And I think it's definitely shifting. And like I said, all of these things lay the foundation for future storytellers and filmmakers and producers and writers and whatnot.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I remember the film Ajami, which came out in, I think, 2012 or 2011, about this neighborhood in, I think it's in Jaffa, in just south of Tel Aviv. The director who made the film felt I remember him reading that he felt quite guilty that it went well internationally, because he's like, well, I would have told it differently. You know, this story was mostly, you know, told for Palestinians and in a certain context, but from an international point of view, it looks very different. And I would have done the story completely differently if I knew it was going to be a success. So it's always a double-edged sword there, isn't it?
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough because you do want to reach everybody. Like you want your story to reach everyone, but if I'm talking to like a Palestinian about certain issues, I would tell it in a certain way because I know that that person will understand it in the way that I intend it. But if you're trying to reach a bigger audience, you really have to be aware of how your message might be interpreted. And are you okay with that? And is that the best thing for the cause and like for what you're trying to achieve? It's a lot of considerations you have to think about.
So to you both, thank you for giving us this wonderful talk. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you both. And I think it was, you know, for our audience as well, I think they will gain a lot from this. So thank you for talking to us at Memo Conversation.
Thank you so much. This was a great conversation. And please, you know, look out for our short, I Am from Palestine. You can see it at riverrun.com, riverrun.com, online tickets. And then also at Chicago Palestinian Film Festival, we are the closing night short with Boycott on May 14th.
And thank you for having me as well. I really appreciate it.
And to our audience, thank you for tuning in. Please do tune in next time for more Memo Conversations.